The scripture reading is from John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. On the third day there was a wedding in the Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. The word of the Lord.
Thank you, Carol. I think you caught that that's kind of a funny story, don't you think? It's a strange story. Jesus goes to a wedding, and they run out of wine. And of course, we kind of laugh at that, like, oh, wouldn't that be a sad thing? Or, but in Jesus' day, that was a big deal. That'd be like, oh, we don't have a wedding cake and the chicken all got burned, so you are out of luck, right? It'd be like, there's no reception for this wedding. It would just seem impossible, not just for the couple that was getting married, but for everyone involved, the entire village, the whole extended family that would work for months and months to get this wedding ready. And then, of course, the weeks of celebration that would be there. No wedding went shorter than a week. I mean, this is party central. And so to have the wine give out is a big deal. In fact, if Jesus would have been telling this story to the crowds in the first century, and he just mentioned the wine ran out, everyone would have gone, they would have just thought that was the worst possible thing. Like Thanksgiving, the turkey is in the garbage. Sorry, everyone, it's just not going to, it just does the unthinkable. And now it's a strange story, especially for Christians who think drinking is a bad idea. Now, of course, we've hosted AA groups here at St. John's for years. Even last night, there was a monthly speakers meeting. People with all kinds of struggles with alcohol come to find support here at St. John's. So we don't make light of drunkenness, do we? We don't make light of the problems with alcohol. But a lot of Christians, for whatever reason, read the Bible and think it says you should never drink. And in fact, it doesn't say that anywhere that I'm aware of. What it does say is don't get drunk on wine. Scotch, totally fine. Don't get drunk on wine. No, it says don't get drunk, right? But instead what? Be filled with the Spirit. Now, there are, of course, many examples in the Scriptures where overindulging in anything will get you into a whole world of trouble. And so that is certainly to be avoided. But at a wedding where it's all about celebration, well, isn't it great? People are just ready to relax and unwind. And it's such a funny story that even just normal in the tradition, right? That you'd bring out the cheap stuff. It's just funny, isn't it? You bring the good stuff out first. Everyone's like, oh, what a fine vintage. This is lovely. And then after they're hammered, you just kind of give them whatever swill is cluttering up the back of the pantry, right? That's just the way that it goes. That's just normal wedding 101, apparently, in the first century. That was just kind of the way that it was. Now, of course, we've been laughing about this for 2,000 years because wouldn't that be a great superpower to have? A lot of people say flying. I say turning water into wine. That would be a little bit better if you ever get asked in a job interview, what superpower would you like to have? I probably wouldn't mention that. That wouldn't be a good one, but it's pretty good. I saw this little joke on the internet. I don't know if you've seen this. The caption is simply that Jesus was here. That's pretty good, right? I mean, you just... Jesus and his disciples, they walk into a bar. Jesus goes up to order drinks, and he says, 12 waters, wink. That's pretty good, right? He's ready for any occasion. But the strange, all the humor aside, why on earth would Jesus turn water into wine? when the guests are already hammered, when the wedding is already done, the celebration is it's a strange story. I mean, don't you think it's a little weird? And in John's gospel, it's the first of his miracles. It's the first sign, as John addresses. There's 7 key signs that demonstrate that Jesus is who he says he is, the emissary of heaven, the Messiah of the world, the Son of God, and eventually the risen Christ. I mean, it's an incredible story. And this is one of the big moments in the story that kicks off the whole thing. It's the start. It's the first big ta-da. And you think, why on earth, Jesus, would you pick this? Well, of course, when we read the story, maybe it becomes clearer. Jesus didn't pick this. Who picked it? Mom picked it, that's right. And people have wondered, why is Mom getting involved here? What's going on? You know, what does Mary have to live with over the course of her life? What kind of rumors and whispers were spoken around all the village gatherings about her and her illegitimate son Jesus? What is going on here that she had to be whisked away to go be with her cousin for a while? I mean, just wonder, oh yeah, sure, he's the Son of God, right? I mean, they weren't all there at Christmas. They didn't know shepherds encountering the angels and the wise men. They didn't know any of that. All they knew is this looked a little funny. And I wonder sometimes when people see things, they're a little funny if there's not just a little of that going on. And I wonder if Mary is even involved in this wedding. Is she in charge of it? Is she helping out? You know, Jesus is pretty clear. You know, woman, what does that have to do with us? And people have wondered about that term, woman. You know, that's not usually how I would address my mom. I don't think if I wanted to live another day. You know, that would just be... But it's a little bit lost in translation. What the scholars tell us is it's a term of respect, but not a term of warmth. So it's not mommy dearest. It's not my precious mommy who raised me and all that, gave birth to me, brought me into this world. It's not that kind of warm, fuzzy kind of greeting, but it's not quite as cold as it sounds in English. It might be more like milady or something if we thought of an old feudal context or something. So it's a respectful term, but it's not real cozy, is it? Woman, what does that have to do with us? Jesus says. And then Mary doesn't even engage in the conversation. Do you ever know someone so well, you just know how to get what you want, and when you don't even have to have an argument? It's like, you know what, we're not going to fight about this. Just do whatever he tells you. I love it. I love how well she knew Jesus, just to get him off the dime, to get him doing what she needed. Don't moms know that sometimes? I mean, that's a pretty good superpower right there. How do you get your son to do miracles? You know, you just don't talk to your son anymore. Just say, do whatever. I mean, it's a strange situation all the way around. And in fact, John records it in such a way that you really feel like you're there. I mean, you're walking into this kind of ancient village in the Holy Land. The whole village has turned out. The invitations have gone. Everybody is there. There's a celebration not just for the couple, but for everyone involved. It's a chance to conduct some business, to meet some people, to renew old ties and kind of brush over old slights. It's just a great, important social grease in the community where people are just together. It's critically important. And if things run out, whether it's the food or, God forbid, the wine, it is a terrible thing. And so Jesus is just walking around, and what did they say? Well, there's these huge stone jars, and John's gospel is one of the later ones written, we think. You know, Matthew, Mark, and Luke were first. About 10 years later, 15 years later, John, aged, one of the last apostles to die for his faith, he puts these words down so we can know. And a lot of people thought, well, did this really happen the way John thinks it happened, and because no one had ever found massive stone jars in the Holy Land. Well, guess what they found not too many years ago around Cana. It wasn't in Cana, but it was a town close to Cana in Israel. What did they find? They find these massive stone jars, just exactly as John said. In fact, John is so accurate in so many archaeological details, a lot of people are saying, no, John's the one that was really there. He saw with his own eyes exactly what he's talking about. He walked with Jesus. How do you know? Because that's right where it happened, and it's incredible. So these big purification stoneware, vessels are just massive, 30 gallons, something like that. I mean, they're just humongous. And what do? They hold water because you got to purify yourself. You got to clean things. You got to take care of business if you're just going to be not just hygienic, but also in a spiritual, ritual kind of sense. You've got to make things right. It'd be like not having any water for baptism. It would just be unthinkable. Of course, we're going to find some water if we're going to baptize someone, right? And so Jesus takes this and turns it into wine. It's a strange, strange story. But I'll tell you what's not strange. That experience that we all have of the wine running out. It may not be literal wine. We're not going to cry if we don't have an extra bottle at the end of the day, right? That's not the end of the world. But that sense that things are going along just fine, and then all of a sudden they're not. That's something I think we can relate to. Particularly if you're married, you can relate to it. I mean, we often tell this story at weddings. Why? Because it's a wedding. Jesus shows up at a wedding. So what a better story to tell is there than Jesus coming to a wedding? I love hanging out with couples, doing the premarital counseling, where they have stars in their eyes and their brains are empty. They don't know anything about what's coming. They're just like I was, like maybe you were if you got married. You're just kind of clueless. You're just so in love. Well, that doesn't always carry enough weight getting through life, does it? That's sometimes not enough. There's got to be something else. And so we often teach couples and marriages and what have you, in my own life experiences, you've got to bring Jesus in to that reality. Why? Because there's going to come a time when the wine is just going to come up empty. It's not going to be there. Whatever you thought you had, now you just don't think you have it anymore. Whatever feelings were there, they just kind of dry up. Now, hopefully, this doesn't all happen in the span of just 1 second, right? Hopefully, it's kind of a gradual process, and you realize that you can take some steps to try to get things back on course. But for many of us, the wine runs out, and we're just left holding the bag like, what happened here? And yet the Lord seems to change his plans. He seems to kick it into a different gear when there's need and there's faith. Mary has some innate thing. She's probably never seen Jesus heal anybody that we know of at this point in the story. She's probably never seen a miracle happen other than the very, very birth of Jesus. Obviously a pretty big miracle. But it's not like she's grown up with Jesus turning water into wine just whenever they need it, right? Oh, Jesus, could you turn this flour into sugar? Could you? They hadn't seen any of that we're aware of, right? But somehow, deep within Mary, she has faith that Jesus can turn this around. It's like, well, this is a problem, but not a problem for Jesus. Wouldn't you like to have faith like that? Where you don't run to God and say, God, do you know how big my problem is? Instead, you run to your problem and you say, do you have any idea how big my God is? It's a great depth of trust that you can just imagine Mary has relied on and nurtured and grown over these years. So that when things seem impossible, you don't just run out to the liquor store and buy enough wine for the whole village. That's not going to do. That's not going to happen, right? It's just a tragedy in the making. But Mary, in the midst of that need, she has incredible faith. And I think Jesus sees that need and that faith mixed together, and he decides, you know what? This is going to be just fine. This will be the first sign letting people know who I am. This will be written down at the beginning of John's Gospel as the first encounter that people have with the majesty and power of God. I don't know how far to push that, but I'll tell you what, when I have a need, I want to have Mary's faith. I want Jesus to come into that situation and say, empty? Nah, not empty. Temporarily maybe, but I can fill that up. When I run up to the end of Greg, there's got to be something at the end of that, right? And Jesus says, yeah, I've got this. Of course, the smarter money would be to even start with Jesus, wouldn't it? And that's what we try to do with so many of the marriages that we work with, the premarital couples and what have you. What do? We say, put Jesus in the invitation list. Make sure he's there. Not just so he can celebrate with you, but so he can be there when things are not so celebratory. We often read that strange scripture out of Ecclesiastes about a cord of 3 strands not being easily broken, right? Who's the third strand? It's got to be of the Lord. And it applies so well to so many needs. I mean, on Easter Sunday, this last week, maybe some of you were here for that, we handed out these great linens. Because when the disciples got to the tomb, you may remember that they didn't find Jesus there. They just found it empty with a bunch of laundry sitting on the step. And you think, what on earth is that about? And yet that linen came to represent, I imagine, for so many, that the tomb is empty. Not because the body was stolen, not because any terrible thing had happened, but because the impossible had happened. When the wine runs out, boy, you want an empty tomb, don't you? Because if the tomb is full, then death is the end of the story. And if death is the end of the story, then this life is all that matters. And what are we wasting our time for doing Christian things when we should just be living it up as best we can? But instead, what does Jesus teach? Not just by his words, but by showing up on the third day, defying all expectations and coming back. That when things are at their bleakest, when things are at their worst, when the impossible is confronting us, Jesus steps in and fills the gap. I love how the chief steward reacts when he's brought the wine. You know, he's been kind of in charge of this, but he may not even know that the wine is run dry. You know, who's going to know first? The lowliest of the servants. Getting the wine, oh, it's empty, you know, they know. He doesn't know, but instead, Jesus takes care of things, takes out some to the guy who's supposedly in charge, the one who should have taken care of this problem perhaps, and gives him a drink, and he makes that incredible humorous statement. Normally, you serve the good stuff first and then pour out the junk when the guests are wasted, right? That's the usual, but you have what? Saved the best for last. Isn't that just like Jesus? He's not bringing the $2 chuck when the well runs dry, right? That's not the way he's operating. He brings the good stuff. Now, what does that teach us about him? It teaches me that even when things are horrible, even when I run out, when Cindy runs out, when we run out, when things are not as they should be, when Jesus comes in and takes care of it, in many ways it's going to be better than it was before. You know, we mentioned the Alcoholics Anonymous groups that have met here over the years, even last night. They said they had their speaker meeting and they pack the house. People come in, they share their testimonies. I mean, it's just an incredible outpouring. When you hear story after story of the brokenness that comes from that kind of destruction and addiction and problems that are all around us, we've got it in our family, we know it's not easy to deal with. But what do you find with people on the other side of that bottom? So often you find people that are put together, not just in the same way that they were, but what? Better than they were. Because they've learned skills, they've learned relational dynamics, they've learned how to say no, they've learned all kinds of things, how to rely on help, how to all the skills, all the higher power, all the good stuff that God brings. They get better on the other side of empty. If we haven't been there, we don't really know, do we? Not just with addiction or any kind of horror like that. Anytime we come up short, it's an opportunity for God to step in and not just put a Band-Aid on it, but make it awesome. Make it better. Make it glorious. Make it a sign that God is around. So if you didn't get one of these linens last week, I encourage you to come up after worship and grab one of these. Maybe you know someone that this would be a useful bookmark, just to say the tomb is empty. Jesus is alive. Easter isn't just an egg and bunny fest, but it's a whole way of living life with God through impossible situations. We're going to spend some time worshiping. And so often when we praise God in the midst of things that are not always great, it's like God sees that faith and He sees that need, and just like Mary pours out her heart to Jesus, automatically, amazingly, incredibly, the Lord comes and meets needs. So I don't know if you've got a big problem where the wine is gone, or a small thing, or a whole bunch of I don't know what it is, but if there's something in you this morning where you just feel like, yeah, Greg, I am coming to the end of me, and I'm not sure how this is ever going to get resolved, I just invite you to sing right into that, worship right into that, and invite God right into the center of that need. Because the promise is not just that He's going to take care of it. The promise, the example that Jesus gives, is that you are going to come through better and stronger. There's going to be an improvement that is beyond even what we might expect. So let's just take those needs to Jesus now. Why don't we stand as we sing together?